in John's Gospel. First miracle, where he changes water into wine at the wedding in Cana. And it's hard, even in my own experience, to kind of uncover the intention because of all the details that get in the way. Most notably, the conversation between Jesus and his mother, as recorded here in John's Gospel. It seems like we have the classic example of a dysfunctional family, right? Because they're at this wedding. We know it's for a relative of Jesus. While they're at the wedding, the wine runs out. We have to understand that that is a disaster. That's a disaster for the host of the wedding, because in the society at that time, most of their life was defined by work, hard work, just to be able to make a living. And if the wine runs out in the middle of this wonderful celebration, it's not like they're going to have another celebration next weekend, or they'll say, okay, tomorrow I'll take you out to a nice place. This was it. Weddings were the major celebrations for the culture and society at that time, especially for farmers, as these people were. So you can imagine, just imagine that Rachel and, let's call them Rachel and Shlomo, are having a wedding. I'll call them something else if you want. And the wine runs out, and for months, perhaps years later, people will be saying, oh, remember when we were at Rachel and Shlomo's wedding and they ran out of wine? How terrible that was? It was a major social mistake for that to happen. So Mary, who's related to the bride and groom, comes to Jesus and says to him, they have no wine. Now that's kind of weird, right? She doesn't say what she wants him to do about it. She doesn't give him direction. She simply says, they have no wine. And Jesus' response seems to go in an equally tangential kind of direction. He says, woman, and this is not an offense, by the way, that he calls Mary woman. He calls most women in John's Gospel woman. He addresses them by their gender. He says, woman. What concern is that to you and me? Now, it depends on how you read that line, too, right? It's like, you ever do this? You send an email or a text because there's no emotion behind it, so that you can say what you want to say and let the person assume the emotion that you have. Like, trying to think of an example. Can I use your example? Sorry. So Marianne sends Will a text the other day. You okay with this? Okay. We're in the married services. Marianne's parents gave Will's girlfriend a gift for Christmas, and she hasn't gotten around to sending thank you notes yet. So that's fine. She's good about it. She's really good about it. Just hasn't done it yet. So Marianne sends Will a text which says this: would you like me to send you Mom's address so Tori can send her a thank you note? Right? Exactly. It's exactly how you interpret that. Does that mean, would you like me to send you Mom's address so you can so Tori can send a thank you note for crying out loud? Or, hey, would you like me to send you Mom's address so Tori can send her a thank you note? Right? Depends on how you interpret that. Have you ever done that in an email? Shouldn't use all caps. Right, all bold. Exclamation points at the end. Have you ever done that, though? I know that if you want to say something that you don't really want to say, or you're afraid how the person will receive it, you email it or text it because there's no emotion behind it. So I'm telling you that because here Jesus responds to Mary and he says, woman, what concern is that to you and me? But we don't have any exclamation points at the end of this. We don't know the emotion that Jesus puts behind this. So it's easy for us to say his attitude was, woman, what concern is that to you and me? Like, leave me alone. And then he says, my hour has not yet come. Like, this is no concern of mine, it's a concern of yours. That's what we assume Jesus says, but maybe what he's saying is, woman, what concern is that to you and me? my hour has not yet come. That this is really not something that I need to be concerned about. Nor do you. Okay, so what can that mean? So in other words, Jesus is saying to Mary about the situation that confronts them, we have bigger concerns. And this is not as important as you think it is. Let me remind you of Mary's reaction to all the visitors that come to her right after Jesus is born. She ponders these things in her heart, wondering what they can mean. So this is just another step in that process of Mary understanding who her son really is. As he says to her, what concern is that to you and me? My hour has not yet come. There's something bigger going on here. Whenever Jesus refers to his hour in John's Gospel, what he's talking about is his crucifixion, resurrection, and ascension. So in other words, that crucial reason for which he came has not yet come to fulfillment. And there's something bigger going on in his presence in the world than perhaps even Mary herself realizes. So Mary says they have no wine. She doesn't tell him what she wants him to do about it. He says, woman, what concern is that to you and me? To you and me? My hour has not yet come. So he responds on a very different level, and then she brings it right back to where she is. She says to those servants standing around, do whatever he tells you. I always thought that meant that she was assuming that he'd still do something about the situation, but maybe what it means is that Jesus says to those servants, go back and sit down again. I'm not telling you to do anything. But we know that that's in fact not what happens. He gets those servants to gather about between 120 and 180 gallons of water together. That is a lot of water. And as we know, then he transforms that water into wine. And despite whatever was going on there in communication between mother and son, the outcome is more than Mary could have ever anticipated. More than anyone could anticipate. In fact, the steward, the master of ceremonies for the celebration of this wedding, the one who was to make sure that everything worked out well on behalf of the bridegroom, says to the bridegroom, this is the best wine we ever had. He says, everybody keeps the good wine, serves that first, and then saves, and then the bad wine, once everybody's drunk and they can't tell the difference. But you just raise the level of this wedding feast by saving the best for last. So Jesus makes this incredible wine and restores the joy of that celebration and the reputation of Rachel and Shlomo, our fictional bride and groom. What does it mean? See, that would be interesting if we could just talk about this scene in the life of Jesus and say, oh, now I understand it a little bit better. This is what I think the point is of this event in Jesus' life. Mary comes to Jesus with a request, though oddly worded. Jesus responds, this is not my concern, nor need it be yours. There's more important stuff going on here than most of these people recognize now. Mary says then, do whatever he tells you. And Jesus, in fact, fulfills his mother's request despite what seems to be to us initial resistance to that request. A different agenda, a different purpose. In other words, Mary's concern is about having enough wine for this wedding feast. Jesus' concern is about salvation for humanity, a restoration of God's relationship with us in ways that are healthy and life-giving, which was not the case at the time, and too often is not the case. Mary's concern is for wine. Jesus' concern is for eternal life and a healthy relationship with God. These two things seem to have nothing at all in common with one another. So Jesus says, what concern is that to you and me? And yet, the outcome is that Jesus, in fact, fulfills Mary's request and does this miracle. And the key to understanding it is that the disciples see what has happened. John tells us this is the first miracle that Jesus does. And